Women continue to be underrepresented in leadership positions, particularly women of color. When you take into consideration that 1/3 of all the MBAs go to women and only 2% of women in business are CEOs and 8% are in top leadership positions, we are still in a minority. Initially, the hope was that filling the pipeline with more qualified women would take care of this underrepresentation problem. This has turned out not to be the answer. Research makes it clear that women's underrepresentation in leadership positions is at least partly attributable to gender expectations, traditional gender expectations, and practices. Also, there is a mismatch between the qualities traditionally associated with leaders and those traditionally associated with women. For example, qualities such as assertiveness, confidence, and coming across with authority are often associated with leaders. More traditionally, women are associated with sensitivity, being friendly, and being nice. So there is a mismatch here that can create a lot of problems. Let me give you a couple of examples. When Hillary Clinton ran for her party's nomination for president in 2008, the slogan, "Life's a bitch, don't vote for one," went viral. She's not alone. England's Margaret Thatcher was called Attila the Hen. Golda Meir, the first Israeli female prime minister, was called the only man in the cabinet. And currently, Angela Merkel, the current chancellor of Germany, has been dubbed the Iron Frau. So we need to begin to feature more successful models of women, and unfortunately the research still shows that successful women are less well liked than their male counterparts. Now let me give you a really specific example of why I make that statement. If any of you have read the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, you might recall that she talks about a Harvard Business School study done. Some of you may be acquainted with the Heidi Howard business case study. In that particular situation, the case study developed, and of course many of you that have been involved in leadership programs might have been exposed to Harvard Business School case studies. If you have an MBA, you probably didn't escape getting it without reviewing a few case studies. So this particular case study was actually based on a woman named Heidi Rosen, a successful real-life entrepreneur. And in the study, half of the students, so these are students of the Harvard Business School, were given the case study with the name Heidi. All the other information was exactly the same. The other half got the case study with the name Howard. So as the students read the case studies and the professors polled the students, here's what they found, that all the students that either received the Heidi or the Howard case study rated the entrepreneur in their case study as competent. And obviously, if you were to read the case study, you would see Heidi Rosen's accomplishments. They're significant, so no one would say that this person in the case study was not accomplished. But the students at a significant level found Howard to be more appealing, and many of them commented that even though Heidi, the people who had the Heidi case study, was successful, she was seen as selfish and not the type of person you'd want to hire or work for. So again, identical case study, just changing the name. So this gender bias around likability and around a disconnect between the characteristics people see of leaders versus the characteristics that women are often attributed by can create a real issue and a prejudice in our system of hiring and developing women. So you see on the left here that the gender stereotype for men is much more in alignment with leadership stereotypes on the right than the stereotype of women. So that incongruity that comes about is a big factor in why women don't try to excel, because we do, probably more than men, although that's not research-based, have a greater desire to be liked. We're brought up that way. So some women drop off, and those that do, as I mentioned with the Hillary Clintons and the Angela Merkels, often feel isolated because they are at the top, so to speak, but not necessarily well-liked. So just as others may view a woman's leadership through a cultural lens that gets distorted by gender bias, another thing I wanted to point out here that's very significant, we as women many times have difficulty developing a viable view of ourselves as a leader. So some recent research suggests that individuals who are unable to firmly ground their self-identity in some of these leadership characteristics may be missing a key requirement for developing as leaders. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I like this picture because we as women in leadership roles are often alone in our own ranks. Can you withstand the isolation and challenges a lonely leadership position affords becomes the question. So let me do a little poll here before we talk about the glass ceiling. The question is, and you'll be able to vote as you take a look at this, the question is, do you believe that barriers to advance as a woman exist in your organization today? Yes or no? How do you guys vote?
No. No. She voted no. Yeah. No.
Okay. Well, interestingly, you go a little bit counter to the research. 40% of you say yes, and 60% of you say no. Research by the Institute of Leadership and Management reports that 73% of the female managers that they studied believe that barriers for women to advance still exist, compared to 38% of the men. So those of you participating in this webinar see it a little bit differently. Men's predominance in positions of organizational power, together with differences in the composition of men's and women's social and professional networks, often give men greater access to information and support. Women in traditionally male-dominated settings, especially women who were not at the more senior levels, often find great difficulty in breaking into the old boys loop of advice and professional development opportunities. And that's why an organization like WEIWC is so important. It affords women at a variety of different levels in their organizations the opportunity. I did want to give you a real-life example of another woman's view of the glass ceiling. In 1999, when Carly Fiorina assumed leadership of Hewlett-Packard, she announced, and I'm quoting here, "I hope that we are at the point that everyone has figured out that there is no glass ceiling." 7 years later, after her well-chronicled ouster from HP, Carly Fiorini wrote in her memoir that she had endless examples of sexism in her workplace, things that she had in the past denied, including routine descriptions of her as a bimbo or a bitch. So that about face kind of captures the ambivalence that some organizations have about women and leadership. few remaining pitfalls that I wanted to mention about women in leadership and what can create barriers. Whether you like it or not, the responsibility of family and maintaining a household, and research bears this out, is more often on the shoulders of a woman than a man in a relationship. For female single parents, this gets compounded, particularly when a woman can't afford outside help like a nanny or help with babysitting and cleaning and all those kinds of things. So a big reason that women step off the fast track is the excessive hours it can take. This can often reinforce assumptions that women in general have a lesser career commitment and can make them seem less worthy of mentoring, training, and challenging assignments, because the organization comes to the conclusion in some cases that they're not committed. Interestingly, if you look at the psychology of this, and as someone who comes from a background in the area of developmental psychology, the concept of cognitive biases also comes into play. People are more likely to notice and recall information that confirms the prior stereotypes than information that contradicts it. And that happens in other aspects of life, not necessarily just in this case. But to take women in leadership as an example, if employers assume that a working mother will sometimes give priority to family over job, they will more easily remember the times when she left early than the times when she stayed late. That's based on cognitive bias. The result is often to reduce women's opportunities for career development, which increases their willingness to step off the leadership track. So you get to see the self-perpetuating cycle here. So we are making progress, in my opinion, not enough, and more needs to be done. But there is hope. I'd like to now focus on some of the unique strengths that women bring to the table and also some strategies for overcoming. Women are becoming more like men in their career aspirations and achievements and are more willing to see themselves as having characteristics associated with authority. So because of some of the cultural sensitivities and programs people have launched in organizations that are viable, this is occurring. The second thing I'd like to mention is that meta-analyses of studies, and for those of you that may not be acquainted with the term meta-analyses, it's really taking a look at all the studies and doing a factor analysis of them. So meta-analyses of the multiple studies done involving leaders suggest that women in their style are more transformational than men. Transformational leaders build trust in organizations and confidence in those they lead, and the focus is on empowering others to develop their potential. So transformational leadership is a style of leadership where the leader is charged with identifying the needed change, creating a vision to guide that change, and executing that change in tandem with committed members of the group. The third strength I'd like to mention that is emerging is that leaders have stressed the importance of women in leadership having interpersonal qualities that align with success in organizations today, such as cooperation, the ability to collaborate, and again, this interpersonal sensitivity. This really, in my estimation, comes down to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the biggest reason why leaders either succeed or fail in organizations. In our work with executive coaching and working with groups, we often focus on we also focus the executive on assessing their emotional intelligence and looking at ways of developing it. Unlike IQ, you can develop your emotional intelligence, or EQ. Some statistics from the Hay Group indicate that emotional intelligence in the workplace has a lot of benefits. So for example, in their research for top leadership positions, emotional intelligence competencies are more than 85% of what sets apart star performers from average performers. Analyses of over 500 competency studies around the world determine 80% of leadership effectiveness involves emotional intelligence. And the higher you go in the organization, the more emotional intelligence competencies matter. So when women can get closer to the top and we have more of us there, some of the emotional intelligence competencies that seem to come more naturally to us are a real advantage. And it doesn't mean that we can't be building them. And that's an area that supports this whole transformational leadership model that I had mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at one of the building blocks of emotional intelligence. You see here a diagram of the self versus others and actions versus awareness. So we look at the self, meaning you, and we look at awareness, which is internal. Self-awareness is all about the area of being more introspective and looking at yourself internally, which is a core building block to emotional intelligence. We then also want to look at your awareness of your impact on others, which is the second block over, versus the actions you're taking for yourself, the self-management piece, as well as the actions you take with others, how you relate to others. So in terms of emotional intelligence, a place where women do have a strength more than men do is in their awareness of their own emotions and their insight into the impact of their emotions on their own performance and on the performance of others. Self-awareness is the capability to recognize, understand, and monitor your thoughts, feelings, and intentions. When you're self-aware, you understand yourself and how your behavior affects others. When we're not self-aware, it makes leading particularly dicey because it's a core building block, a foundation of good leadership. And it sometimes takes a life crisis, especially for an adult, to point out our blind spots. So loss of a promotion, getting fired, a marriage ending, perhaps even a bout with a serious illness like cancer, can make us more aware of when we are self-aware of our feelings and their impact on others and when we're not. Are we stuffing our feelings or are they coming out in weird ways? So even though women have an advantage here, it is a place that I encourage you to examine in more depth. I've written several books, and in one of the books that I've written called What Animals Teach Us, I interviewed a successful businesswoman named Pat. And Pat did not become aware of her own feelings and the impact they had on others until she had a real life crisis. Pat headed customer service worldwide for a major computer company. She had been considered a high potential earlier in her career, and she was known for working long hours and producing results. As Pat moved up in the company, she earned a reputation for being somewhat difficult to work with, but she did produce these amazing results. At the same time, as Pat was sort of at the peak of her career in the organization and the highest ranking woman, she became aware of a congenital condition that happened in her family regarding eyesight, but was exacerbated by the stress of her job. She let her job pretty much run her. Pat noticed that she wasn't seeing well, and over a relatively short period of time, her eyesight diminished to the point where she became totally blind. After the year she lost her eyesight, she took a break from her work. Pat attended the Southeast Guide Dog School, which is located in Palmetto, Florida. I'm based in Florida, in Tampa, and got to interview Pat through her affiliation with the Southeast Guide Dog School. Pat was assigned a black lab named Bart. Bart was a big, strong guide dog and was taught to give in when Pat's life was not in danger, but not to give in, as any guide dog is, when there's imminent danger to their person. So knowing Pat's own personality, Pat was glad that she got this strong dog. And she admitted to me in the interview that she thought she could treat her dog Bart like a rental car. So Bart became this tool to help Pat get back into her job. Pat had difficulty giving up control, as I mentioned earlier, so allowing Bart to guide her was very stressful for Pat and probably for Bart as well. She'd walk into trees because she'd override Bart's guidance, get a few black and blue marks, but finally she and Bart finished guide dog school. So Pat's big trip was at their first convention since her illness in New Orleans, and Pat had been there many times, and all her big customers were going to be there. So she was bound and determined not to let her disability slow her down. Pat got up early the first day of the conference. It was 5:30 in the morning, and she took her dog Bart outside to relieve himself behind the hotel. As she was going out, the bell captain said, "Hey, Pat, can I help you?" And Pat said, no, I need to learn how to do this myself. I'm blind now, and I got to get over it. So Pat takes her dog outside, and despite her attempts to hurry Bart along so he could do his business and get back in the hotel, Bart refused to move. In fact, Bart began to pull her in the opposite direction of where she was leading him. This time, when Pat resisted, Bart's strength and determination overpowered her. When she felt Bart's fur against her leg and she could tell it was standing on end, she gave up control and followed Bart's lead. They made a big U-turn and wound up in the front of the hotel. When Pat got into the lobby, she could not contain herself. She just started yelling at Bart, "You stupid dog, I'm bringing you back to the guide dog school," and really kind of created a scene in the lobby. All of a sudden, in the back of the lobby, Pat heard a tiny voice saying, ma'am, please, don't yell at your dog." I work in housekeeping. I was in the bus coming here. The bus was in the back of the hotel. I saw the whole thing. A man stepped out from behind the stairwell. He had a gun, and he was coming straight at you. At that moment, it hit Pat. She fell to her knees and began to sob uncontrollably. She realized in that watershed moment that she has had difficulty relinquishing control to people in her life and in her work. And it was this revelation that helped Pat begin to change her life. Pat didn't stay with the computer company very long. She became a board member of the Southeast Guide Dog School and went after one of her passions, which is to teach people about the importance of helping the disabled, and when you're disabled, using service animals. So that's an example of how someone learned the hard way about the whole area of self-awareness. The point here is it is learnable, and we can learn it before that kind of watershed moment. And some of us as women are particularly good at this naturally. Little self-awareness humor here. Sometimes we don't want to admit that the problem starts with us. One of the biggest issues that I face in serving as an executive coach to others is that when they get feedback, like in a 360, I use one 360 that gives emotional intelligence feedback on the competencies and behaviors that go into an emotionally intelligent leader. The person receiving the feedback, even though it comes from their boss, the people around them, and their direct reports, are often in denial. And it takes really getting that feedback to get them to look at, okay, what part am I playing in whatever issue is going on? So in summary, emotional self-awareness is about understanding your own feelings, about not stuffing them and being able to describe to yourself how your feelings affect your actions. An example of this, my mom always said, I was a very happy baby until I was tired or hungry, and that still plays out today. So I'm very aware that when I haven't eaten or I'm low on sleep, that I'm not always as in touch with my feelings, and the impact my actions have on others changes. So that kind of awareness is really important. You also understand your strengths and realize that there are areas that you're not strong. And then understanding the connection between what is happening and your own feelings, much like the example of Pat. So emotional self-awareness, a core building block of leadership, and also an area that I encourage women to develop. Having a 360 would be great, but if your organization doesn't offer one, you can do this informally by interviewing people in your work environment in a non-threatening way and gather information. Questions like, what do you think my strengths are? And can you give me some examples? And where do you think I fall short at times? And what do you think could help me be even more effective as a leader? And not defending, but just listening and asking questions can give you a storehouse of information to develop your self-awareness.